So I want to talk about the trade deadline and where the Kings fit into everything and what I want them to do compared to what I think they'll do. But in order to break all of that down, I kind of need to talk about where the Kings are in comparison to the rest of the teams in the West, or at least the teams who are most likely going to make the playoffs. The Sacramento Kings currently find themselves in fifth place, 3 games back of the Clippers, who hold the fourth seed, and 1 game in front of the Suns, who are currently sixth in the West. The Kings are 5 games back to the 1 seed and 5 games in front of the 10 seed. So they're smack dab in the middle of this absolutely loaded Western Conference. Compared to where the Kings were this time last year, we're actually a game better. Last year, through 45 games, the Kings were 26 and 19. Currently, through 45 games, we are 27 and 18. But I bet you every single person watching this felt a whole lot better this time last year than you do right now. But, that's the price you pay when you buy your ticket to become competent. However, I have a few interesting stats here that I hope will make you feel at least a little better. The Sacramento Kings are the only team in the entire league that are top 5 in back-to-backs, rest disadvantage, travel distance from game to game, and they are also top 5 in strength of schedule up to this point. Safe to say, we have had the hardest schedule in the entire league. And yet, we find ourselves right in the middle of the action, absolutely in striking distance of that 1 seed. Do I think we'll get that 1 seed? I do not. But am I happy with where the Kings are right now? I am. There's things we need to improve if we want to win a playoff series this year, but considering how poorly our team has played at various points of the season, I think Kings fans should be content with where we are. I won't say happy because, we have higher standards for our team. We see their potential and see how they haven't quite lived up to that potential this year. But maybe all we need is a little roster shakeup. And I promise I am going to get to those trades shortly. But right before I do that, I want to talk about this Western Conference for just a moment more. Right now, as currently constructed, if the playoffs started today, the Kings would not be favored in all but one potential matchup, and that is with the 10th seed Utah Jazz, who are, of course, the hottest team in the West. Now, I'm not saying that's the only team I think the Kings would beat in a 7 game series. I'm just saying if I had to predict what Vegas would predict, I think we'd be dogs in pretty much every possible playoff matchup. Take a look at the standings. Who would you feel confident going against in the first round? Who would the Kings be the favorite against? The only team they'd be a clear favorite over is Utah. I think against most teams in the West, we'd probably make it a 6 or 7 game series, except for maybe the Nuggets and Clippers. And honestly, the Pelicans as well. They'd probably sweep our ass, honestly. That's the matchup I want least of all. But the teams I think we'd beat in the first round are OKC, the Mavs, Lakers, and Jazz. All of those matchups would be tough though, and none of them would be automatic wins. And honestly, there's really no one that I'm absolutely confident we'd beat. I think we could definitely beat the Timberwolves, the Nuggets. The Nuggets, we might be able to take them 6 games. The Thunder, I think we could definitely beat. The Clippers, again, we just do not match up well against them at all. And I mean, they're one of the hottest teams in the league as of late as well. They could easily be the 1 seed when it's all said and done. The Suns, I definitely think we could beat too, but I mean, they're fully healthy. They have a three-headed monster that a lot of teams, not just the Kings, are going to really struggle against. I think the Kings match up pretty well against the Mavericks and the Lakers. The Jazz, like I mentioned before, I think are the only team that we'd be like favorites against. But even them, I think that might go 6 or 7 games. The Pelicans are the team I'm scared of the most because it seems like every time we play them, we are down by 50 at some point. And I just don't want any of that in a playoff series. I really don't. But yeah, now, depending on how this trade deadline goes, things could change. I don't know if the Timberwolves or Nuggets or Thunder, Clippers, Suns, etc. are going to make any significant moves. But with that said, I'd imagine the teams who consider themselves contenders are going to be making moves to improve. So if the Kings want to stay within that top 6, they need to make some moves as well. Now, as I'm sure most of you know, the 3 guys on the Kings who are the most likely to be moved are Harrison Barnes, Kevin Huerter, and Davion Mitchell. In an ideal world, Harrison Barnes would be a perfect veteran wing off the bench. He'd give you solid scoring and defense while providing veteran wisdom and an overall calming presence to this team. And you wouldn't have to rely on him like a normal team would with one of their starting forwards. However, with the way things are on this team, when you look at the roster, the ages of their core guys, their future draft capital, etc., that sadly will just never happen. He's not good enough to be a starting forward on a contending team, but he's too good to not try and get something valuable for him. Now, Kevin Herter, he's been playing some really good basketball on both sides of the floor as of late. If he can be this version of himself consistently, and most importantly, in the playoffs, then I'm confident in him being our starting shooting guard moving forward. If this is the version of Kevin Herter we're getting on a nightly basis, I think the only real upgrade this team needs is at the starting three or four, whichever you consider Barnes to play. I still don't really know if he's the three and Keegan's the four or vice versa. It doesn't really matter. An upgrade over Barnes and a consistent Kayvon would solidify this team as a borderline contender and even a sleeper team to make a run in the playoffs. The only other place that I think a somewhat significant upgrade could be made is with our backup point guard, and that's where Davion Mitchell comes into play. As much as I love Davion's heart and hustle, he just hasn't paid off the high draft pick we used to get him. In a bubble, he's a fantastic on ball defender, but due to his lack of size and offensive playmaking, he's relatively easy to game plan around. I think he could still end up being a solid NBA role player, but if the Kings are serious about being contenders in the future, they're going to need a proven point guard to lead that bench unit. Tyus Jones would be perfect for the Kings, but, the Wizards aren't just going to give us their starting point guard for Davion Mitchell and a bag of chips. They're going to want some significant draft capital coming their way. In an ideal world, and yes, we're going to go back there again, it's a much better place than the real world, especially as a Kings fan. But in an ideal world, we'd go out and trade for an athletic rim protecting wing who can guard 1 through 5 and space the floor, who's on a reasonable contract with multiple years remaining on it, who fits the team's timeline and is attainable for the likes of Harrison Barnes, Kevin Herter, Davion Mitchell, and some picks. But unless I'm forgetting about someone, that guy does not exist. The next best option, in my opinion, is Mikal Bridges, but apparently the Nets view him as untouchable. So, where does that leave the Kings? Well, before I talk a little bit about the guys who you've already heard me and every other guy on YouTube and Twitter talk about, let me play devil's advocate for a second. You could look at Barnes and Herter, and even Davion to an extent. You could look at their recent performances and overall really solid play and say, hey, they're back. This team is fine. These are the guys we remember from last year who led us back to the playoffs and the 3 seed. Or you could look at it as they're getting hot at the perfect time, right before the trade deadline. Their value is never going to be higher, so sell them right now. And honestly, because each of these guys still have multiple years on their deals, Monty is more likely going to play it safe and hang on to them, rather than, shake up the chemistry and all that. Although, I will say, that excuse fit our situation last year more so than this year, but regardless, there's no rush to trade any of these guys. But say we do trade some guys. If I had to choose one guy to hold on to, it'd be Herter for sure. I just think he's the most likely one to maintain this level of play. Also, as our roster currently stands, it doesn't make a ton of sense to trade Herter unless we're trading HB as well and getting back at least one starting level wing who would assumably be an upgrade over both Herter and HB. My point being, trading Herter leaves us with a hole at shooting guard and leaves HB as the starting 3, and the guy we'd be trading for could only fill one of those voids. But trading Harrison Barnes, I would assume, would upgrade one of the starting wing positions while keeping Herter as our starting shooting guard, and he would, I assume, be our 5th best starter. I like that option more. I think Herter can be a starter on a contending team. As I said earlier, I do not feel that way about Barnes. So I guess I'm taking the stance of I want Herter on the team unless we're getting a massive upgrade at one of our starting spots. Now, let's see who those potential upgrades could be. The most popular guys that I've seen in mock trades and Bleacher Report articles and things of that nature are Kyle Kuzma, Jeremy Grant, Bojan Bogdanovic, Dorian Finney-Smith, Zach LaVine. Now, without getting into how these guys would fit on the team or how these guys could potentially transform us into contenders, let's take a step back and ask ourselves why the Wizards or the Blazers or Nets or any of these teams for that matter would want HB, Davion, Herter, or picks that would probably be in the 20s. Personally, I don't know why any of these teams would want those guys. I guess Herter and Davion are still young and other teams might think they can tap into their potential, but a lot of these guys I feel like, Harrison Barnes specifically, are guys that like a contender would want to kind of fill out their rotation. But say we do somehow convince the team to make a trade with us, I think all these guys are upgrades over HB and Davion obviously. Herter at his price, there's a debate there, but at the end of the day, I'm just not super excited about any of these guys. But y'all tell me how you feel. I really am curious what other Kings fans are hoping we do at the deadline. But the main reason that Kuzma, Jeremy Grant, Zach LaVine, etc. don't excite me too much honestly has to do more with the Kings than it does with the player. The Kings have 2 max contract guys. And in a couple of years, Keaton is going to get like 30 million a year or something like that. If we trade for a guy like Jeremy Grant, by the third year of his deal, we'd have Domas and Fox as max guys, and we'd have Keaton and Jeremy as 30 mil guys. So that's our team, because those contracts don't give us a ton of flexibility to fill out our roster. So that's why at this deadline, I think it makes more sense for us to go for some low risk, low reward types of trades, improve on the margins, and see where Fox, Domas, and Keaton can take you in year two of this iteration of the Kings. But, say we do trade for a big name guy and give up a few players to do so. Well, it's going to take some time to get those guys integrated into the system, and that could cost us some games. And with the way the Western Conference is right now, a week or two long slump could have us on the outside looking in. Do I think the Kings should make a trade at the deadline? It really depends. Look, I know that's a shitty answer, but I'd rather the Kings do nothing than fuck up the future. Even if the Kings make a move, there's a decent to pretty good chance they still get bounced in the first round. Are they one of the top four teams in the West? Maybe, but not definitively. And even if they make a move, best case scenario is that they're a borderline top three team in the West. Can a top three team make some noise in the playoffs? Absolutely. But I don't know if there's a move to be made that solidifies us as a team that's moving on to the second round or beyond. However, I will say, with how bunched up and chaotic the West is right now, there's really not a ton of teams where you can be super confident that they'll make it out of the first round. Nuggets and Clippers are the only two, in my opinion, that I think are for sure making a deep run in the playoffs. There's so much parity in the league in general, but especially in the Western Conference. It's honestly like very open. I think Denver is still the favorite, and the Clippers are, right behind them, but it's the Wild West. I hate when people say that, but if there's any year where that statement has some validity, it's this year, man. Like, this is the Wild West to a T. So every team that ends up making the playoffs should be thinking, why not us? With that line of thinking, maybe there is a guy out there who the Kings and Monty McNair think puts the Kings fully into that conversation. They're on the verge of that conversation right now. They've shown flashes of greatness. They've also shown flashes of not so great things. At the end of the day, what's really going to matter is which teams show up come playoff time. But, that's a hard thing to predict in January or February. I can't fucking say February. I don't know why. That's the thing that probably pisses me off the most about the way I talk. But back to my point, if there was a perfect guy that was available, that would make this deadline a lot easier. But, every single guy who is available has some question marks. Can Kyle Kuzma play defense and be a team-oriented guy? Can Jeremy Grant maintain this level of play for the remaining 4 years of his contract? Can Dorian Finney-Smith, or anybody for that matter, make a big enough difference to where it's worth giving up some assets? And obviously, there's always going to be some risk involved when you're making trades. I understand that. And honestly, if the assets we're giving up are just Harrison Barnes and Davion Mitchell, plus, I'd assume some picks, then you're giving yourself some wiggle room because you're not really giving up anybody of tremendous value. But you also can't be expecting to get anybody back of any tremendous value. I feel like I'm talking in circles here, man. So let me say this. The entire trade deadline for the Kings boils down to this. We're probably not going to get anything exciting if we don't give up anything exciting. And honestly, I'm fine with that. But let's at least try to improve on the margins. If we can, go get an improvement over Harrison Barnes, preferably a defensive-minded athletic wing who can start at either the 3 or the 4, and maybe even throw in a backup point guard. Ideally a vet who's been around and maybe even won a little. Make some solid improvements, let the core continue to develop together, and let's try to take advantage of this relatively wide open Western Conference. But let me know what you guys think. And as always, thanks for watching. Go Kings, light the beam.